Good afternoon, EarthX 2025. It is marvelous to see such a fantastic crowd here to hear the generals speak on strategic leadership. We're going to frame our remarks on his theme of strategic leadership, cover a few areas of the world, and then hopefully leave you with some insights you can take back to your own professional careers. So General, people know you as the General, Director of the CIA, but they may not know so much about the KKR Global Institute that you founded. Could you tell us a bit about your role with KKR Global Institute?
Sure. So I joined KKR. Many in this room will know that KKR is one of the great investment firms of the world. I've been there for over 12 years and a partner for over 11. During the time I've been there, we've grown from $83 billion under management to over 650, so it's been a terrific time to be with that great firm. And I was brought in to establish and then lead the KKR Global Institute, which does the risk assessment and identification of risks of various types during the diligence process, to ensure that we can mitigate them sufficiently that they will not prevent a successful outcome. And in the case where we believe we cannot do that, actually to veto that deal. We've done that about 9 times over that 10 years. That is a very big deal when the deal team has put a huge amount of effort and money into the diligence process for the Global Institute to say, we're sorry, but we see obstacles that cannot be overcome, and we think you should not do the deal. We also help our companies when they run into trouble. That's happened on a much greater frequency, probably 60 times or so over the years. And this is a case where we own about 120 or more companies. We have minority investments in another 120. And we're brought in. There's some kind of challenge that has accumulated here. And because of relationships, the ability to have people answer my phone calls or a knock on the door, and long time, again, partnerships with individuals in various parts of the world, we have been able to solve every single one of the 60-ish problems that otherwise would have prevented a successful outcome for our company. It's a pretty big task, frankly. It is one in which our co-founders were ahead of the game, Henry Kravis and George Roberts, who have been at the firm for 49 years, all 49 of them. And as is often the case with them, they saw that geopolitics was going to be much more important down the road. And that has proven to be true because over the last 12 years that I've been there, the world has transformed seismically from a world of benign globalization in which economics largely drove geopolitics. All the barriers to trade and investment were being reduced, to a world of renewed great power rivalries in which geopolitics is back with a vengeance and the challenges are growing. And now it's geopolitics that is driving economics. And of course, that's even more so now given the various tariffs that have been imposed and the threats of tariffs that are having such an impact. And the sooner, obviously, that we can resolve the final numbers of those tariffs, the better it will be for consumer confidence and also for business confidence.
Thank you, sir. Let's dive in a little bit deeper on the geopolitics. Trammell had the great foresight of including Ukrainian delegations at EarthX, beginning all the way back in 2018, when we just had all types of different innovators. We are blessed to have a wonderful delegation from Ukraine here with us today.
In fact, could I ask that the Ukrainian delegation stand up so that we can thank you for what you're doing? Let me just take it from here.
Okay. And
thank you very much.
yes.
I'm very pleased, frankly. They brought a flag that they presented to me, signed by their former commander-in-chief of the military, whom I know very well, General Zaluzhny, and also among them are veterans. And I just want to say right here that it is critically important that we continue to do all that we can to support a country that shares our values and principles, has been brutally invaded by their neighbor, unprovoked, and we have got to ensure that they have everything they can so that they can change the dynamic on the battlefield and convince Vladimir Putin that he cannot achieve further gains at an acceptable cost, and that is hugely important. I have visited Ukraine 5 times a week each time since this 2022 invasion. It is a very, very tough situation for the Ukrainians right now. I know that there are some in America who question whether we should help a country that's way over there and where the Europeans are not doing all that they should. They are now. Give credit to President Trump where it is due for getting the Europeans serious about doing more for defense. But we need to recognize that if we don't help a country like Ukraine in its hour of need, no one is going to believe that we're going to help another country around on the other side of the world if it is threatened. We must maintain deterrence around the world, and the most important location for that, needless to say, is in the Indo-Pacific. Deterrence is a function of 2 elements: the potential adversary's assessment of your capabilities and their assessment of our willingness to use those capabilities. And if we want to ensure that peace continues in the Indo-Pacific, you've got to be very, very certain that we are doing all that we can to ensure there's no question about our capabilities or our willingness to use them without being needlessly provocative. So thank you for what you are doing in a country that values democracy, free market capitalism, and sovereignty of borders. We have to stop Russia there, because if we don't, Moldova would be next, then Lithuania. And this is about security of the entire world, not just that over in Europe. It's very much where our freedom begins right now as well.
Yes, thank you, General, for your supportive remarks of Ukraine. And I also want to recognize again Hunter Hunt, whose family has flown the Ukrainian flag in our downtown Dallas since the day of the invasion. So alongside America's flag, Texas flag is Ukraine. General, let's move to the discussion of your book. A couple of years ago, you published a book, Conflict, The Evolution of Warfare from 1945 to Ukraine. Could you tell us what prompted you to write this New York Times best-selling book, by the way, that all the proceeds are going to military charities?
Yeah, actually, it's quite simple. Russia invaded Ukraine, and my co-author called up. I've known my co-author, he's now Lord Roberts, by the way. I've known him for many, many years. Andrew called up and said, you know, there's no book that provides the military historical context for Ukraine. How would you like to write it with me? And it is indeed Conflict, the Evolution of Warfare from 1945. So we begin at the end of World War II. And actually, the second edition takes it all the way through Gaza. It was a delight to work with him. This is his 20th book, the first that he ever did with a co-author. He has typical British wit. And he also has a capacity that I think the British have that certainly I do not have. And that is the ability to speak coherently and in full sentences after having had a drink or 2 or 3. And we've had many fun evenings together on the book launch tour.
That may be the reason Governor Abbott made him an honorary Texan. Lord Andrew always likes me to remind people he's an honorary Texan.
Well, he also wrote the best single-volume biography of Churchill. He wrote about Napoleon. By the way, he has a very dim view of the movie Napoleon. And again, a true scholar, a great biographer, and the consummate historian.
Yes. The core lessons of this book, however, are really about your views on strategic leadership.
Yeah.
Could you tell our audience about the core task of a strategic leader?
Sure. So when we sat down and mapped out what we would do and so forth, and by the way, when we did a Zoom finally there was quite a competitive bidding process, and the ultimate publisher won, and we then sat down with the individual who's going to be our editor, and he said, now, how are you going to go about this? How are you going to divide the tasks and so forth? And My co-author, Andrew Roberts, quickly said, well, General Petraeus is going to write about the countries that he invaded, plus Vietnam, which was the subject of my PhD dissertation at Princeton, and he said, I'll fill in the rest. But what we did is we sat down up front, and I said, Andrew, there was an intellectual construct for strategic leadership that I used. I developed it between my 3- and 4-star tours in Iraq, and so I used it for the surge in Iraq, for Central Command, all the Mideast, Afghanistan, CIA, et cetera. And it has 4 tasks. And this is applicable, by the way, to any leader of any organization, including a leader of an enterprise like this. First is you got to get the big ideas right. You have to craft the right strategy. Sounds easy? We've often failed to do that. It took us 13 years in Vietnam to get the big ideas right. A true failure for those who are fighting and dying on the ground. It took us 9 years in Afghanistan to get the big ideas right, plus the overall organizational architecture, the right number of troops, the right leaders in place, the right enablers, State Department, AID, and others. So this is task number 1. Number 2, you've got to communicate the big ideas effectively through the breadth and depth of the organization, of the force in this case, and to all who have a stake in the outcome of a conflict, a business enterprise, or whatever. Third, you have to oversee the implementation of the big ideas. This is what we normally think of as leadership. This is the energy that the leader provides, the example, the inspiration. It's hiring the best and brightest and incentivizing them, keeping them. It's allowing those not measuring up to move on to something else. It's the organizational architecture that you design and redesign and refine. It is the metrics that you use, and it is also how you spend your time, your battle rhythm, we called it. In fact, we spent a great deal of time at the outset of the surge in Iraq determining how I could most effectively, efficiently, and productively use my time. What are the recurring meetings, activities, gatherings, trips? In fact, twice a week, for example, right after the morning updates and so forth, we would go out and join a small unit and go on a patrol outside the wire, under body armor and Kevlar, experiencing at least a bit of what our young men and women were doing on a daily basis. On that battle rhythm as well are events and activities that enable you or force you, because sometimes you need to be pushed yourself, to perform the 4th task, which is to determine how you need to refine the big ideas as the context evolves, as you experience progress, setbacks, shortcomings, victories, failures, and that is crucial. If you think about Kodak, some in the room here are old enough to remember the company that was the champion of film photography and services. Their failure was they had 2,000 patents on digital photography. They failed to make that the new big idea. Others got there first, and they have never, ever been the same, showing again how important this is. Now, to illustrate that this works in the business world, I'll offer the example of Netflix. I think Reed Hastings is one of the great strategic leaders of our time, right up there with Jack Ma of Alibaba and Jeff Bezos of Amazon and others, and probably the two right here, Trammell and as well. So in the case of Netflix, the first big idea, and I sat down with Reed Hastings and discussed this with him, the first big idea was we're going to put movies in the hands of customers without brick and mortar, so we're going to charge them less than the competition does in that particular case. And Blockbuster pretty quickly started going out of business. By the way, there's one Blockbuster left in the lower 48. Anybody know where it is? Big Bend, Oregon. Very good. Back there, that man gets a free drink tonight. It's a famously contrarian place. It refuses to allow its Blockbuster to die, and that is awesome because those of my generation can take our grandkids there and show them what we used to do on a Friday night. Anyway, the second big idea came when Reed Hastings realized that broadband speeds were much faster. So now they allowed people to download movies. Third big idea, the breakout moment, This is when he decided that we're going to make our own content. Revolutionary. $100 million invested in House of Cards alone, all these other iconic series that we have binge watched during COVID and everything else. And then the fourth big idea was we're going to make major motion pictures. And Netflix went out and it bought not one, but 2 major movie studios. And how about this for a metric? They got more Academy Award nominations 3 or 4 years ago than any other major studio. Now, when I sat down with Reed Hastings, I did have to explain to him that there was one movie that I felt just did not work. And this is the one in which Brad Pitt played my very close friend and combat comrade of over 5 years, General Stan McChrystal. Brad Pitt marched around like a little toy soldier. He saluted awkwardly. He had no sense of humor. It just did not work at all. But besides that, I had to confess to Reed Hastings that I could not believe that Brad Pitt didn't hold out to play me. But this construct really does work. And it's the prism through which we examine every one of the conflicts in the book that we wrote. And no surprise here, inevitably, the side that had the best strategic leadership, that performed these 4 tasks the best, was the one that typically prevailed.
Thank you, General. Let's review a bit more on Iraq and the surge in Iraq, the strategic leadership there. And I'd also like you to go into a bit of the battle rhythm. I think for our audience to understand what you really mean by battle rhythm and how President Bush stepped up to that.
Well, let me actually talk about, again, the big ideas, and then I'll just quickly shift to President Bush, given that he's a native son, neighbor of so many of you here, and so respected by so many of you, and obviously by me. In the surge in Iraq, we changed the big ideas 180 degrees. Change leadership can't get any bigger than that. We had been consolidating our forces on big bases, driving around the neighborhoods a few times a day, and then back in the big base to sleep. And the insurgents, Al-Qaeda, the Shia militia supported by Iran, were filling in as we left. The forces of Iraq were not sufficient as the violence grew in the civil war. This was a full-blown Sunni-Shia civil war. In Baghdad, the nation's capital, there were 53 dead civilian bodies due to violence every 24 hours. That doesn't include the police, the military, all the others, the combatants. It was out of control. I recognized this, and I said, we have to shift from clear, would go into a neighborhood clear of bad guys, violence would go down, leave, and the violence would come back. And I said, we are going to clear, hold, build, rebuild, and then gradually, slowly transition after we have really built back up the Iraqi security forces that were so battered by that point in time by the civil war. And we created gated communities to do this. We used to tell the Iraqis, you know, you pay a lot of money for a gated community in Florida, and we are giving it to you for free. Essentially, what this means is we would clear a neighborhood and we would wall it off completely with what appropriately were termed Texas barriers or T-walls, because they're the largest, of course, needless to say, carrying on from the state. We would then give biometric ID cards to those who belonged in the neighborhood. We would control the entry control point, and almost immediately, the neighborhood would begin to come back to life. People remember how bad Fallujah was year after year after year. We did 2 major operations there, and they were not sustained. We went in, we created 12 gated communities in Fallujah, a city of about 300,000 people, after walling off the entire city, and it came back almost immediately. We cleared every building, floor, room, cellar, tunnel, and did it sequentially, not allowing the enemy to fill back in behind us, which was crucial. Controlled that entry control point, started building local governance and local security, and within a matter of 6 weeks, I remember taking Katie Couric through the market that had come back to life almost organically, and I didn't even wear a Kevlar helmet, I had on a soft cap. Now, what was crucial to the success of the surge was not just President Bush's incredibly courageous decision to surge instead of to withdraw, which almost all of his military advisors, except for me, were advising. They felt it had gone, just let it go down the drain. We cannot retrieve the situation. And he did not take that advice. Instead, he said, we're going to get a new commander, a new ambassador, and we're going to provide more forces to enable the more rapid implementation of the new strategy, which was going to be a comprehensive civil-military counterinsurgency campaign based on the field manual that we wrote when I was also a 3-star between the 3- and 4-star tours to carry that out. Now, this was hugely significant. And I remember going to see him after I was confirmed by the Senate, about ready to leave for Iraq. And he said, well, General, we're doubling down, and I have great confidence in you. And I said, Mr. President, your military is going all in, and we need the rest of government to go all in with us. And he said, I will ensure that happens. He took over control of the war from the Secretary of Defense, who also moved on to other occupations. As you may recall, in the latter part of 2006, the surge began in early 2007. He began the week in Washington at 7:30 on a Monday morning with all the security team around the Situation Room table in the West Wing of the White House, started promptly on time, lasted for an hour, and it was a video conference with the ambassador and me. And he didn't ask anybody around that table, how's it going in Iraq, CIA director. He went directly to us. And you cannot imagine how empowering that was. Once a week, by the way, nothing in Washington ever starts before 9 or 10 in the morning anyway. And here it is on a Monday morning, 7:30, and it was unbelievably important to the ambassador and to me because we did not go out there to lose gracefully, and we were difficult subordinates on a number of occasions, and we could not have been that way. We could not have pushed as hard as we did and gotten all that we did if it had not been for the Commander-in-Chief having our back in the most significant way imaginable. His confidence in us was validated in the end. Our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, coalition partners drove violence down by nearly 90% in 18 months and kept it down. It stayed down. In fact, it continued to go down even farther over the subsequent 3.5 years as we conducted an orderly withdrawal of our forces based on a timeline in Iraq, not a timeline in Washington, which is what happened, unfortunately, with the drawdown in Afghanistan. And again, I just cannot say enough about President Bush as the commander-in-chief of that phase of the war in Iraq, because if it had not been for his courageous decision and his commitment to us, those of us downrange, it would not have been possible to give the land of the two rivers another great opportunity. And that meant everything in the world to those of us who are out there implementing the policy.
Ah, that's beautiful, General. Thank you. Yes. I know you leaders in this room, that's a very wonderful takeaway for you, standing behind those who serve you. But you have just been named now KKR chairman of Middle East, which is an extraordinary new role. Going from battle in Iraq to chairman of KKR Middle East. Could you tell us about some of the positive developments? We know the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, for example, are going to be on nuclear together.
Yeah, look, I mean, first of all, I have to acknowledge that no retired four-star ever turns down another title. So in addition to being partner of KKR, chairman of the KKR Global Institute, now chairman of KKR Middle East, and it's really a reflection, frankly, of our term's determination to do much more investing in the Middle East, not just much more fundraising, which we have always done very, very effectively. But interestingly, this is a part of the world that, to me, looks much brighter than it did even just 6 or 8 months ago, because Iran's major proxy in the Middle East, Hezbollah, has been dramatically degraded by first the supply chain operation that carried out by Israel that resulted in thousands of pagers that were in the hands, literally, of all of the leaders of Hezbollah blowing up simultaneously, and then the walkie-talkies, the other form of communications, blowing up the next day. That deprived Hezbollah of the ability to carry out a plan that we all feared which would have been to overwhelm Israel's sophisticated air and ballistic missile defense with many, many thousands of simultaneous missile, drone, and rocket attacks. They then carried out a very systematic air campaign that dramatically reduced the number of those weapons from roughly 150,000 at the start of the war that was brought about, of course, by the horrific October 7 operation by Hamas, truly barbaric in its carrying out. But Israel then dramatically reduced the capacity of Hezbollah, 150,000 down to probably 10 or 15,000, and they're really unable now to rebuild because serendipitously, the murderous regime of Bashar al-Assad in neighboring Syria was overthrown, and much greater opportunity there, I think, and at the very least, no longer an ally to Iran that enables Iran to send weapons, missiles, rockets, all the rest across Iraq, through Syria, and down into southern Lebanon to Hezbollah. So a very positive development. You also have the air and ballistic missile defenses of Iran dramatically degraded by the Israeli response to the second attack from Iranian soil on Israel, and that is hugely significant because it was carried out with US-provided F-35s, the stealth fighters, and we never really knew how well they would do against this quite sophisticated system. And if it comes to it, if there is the necessity to destroy the Iran nuclear program, if negotiations do not materialize with a good agreement, that is particularly significant. Then there's also much more pressure on the Houthis in Yemen, another Iranian proxy that has been disrupting shipping through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. And obviously Hamas dramatically degraded, although not destroyed the way they should be, nor have all the hostages been recovered, nor is there yet an effective way of preventing Hamas from governing again. There's a big idea having to do with that is lacking. But broadly speaking, the Mideast is really a very, very attractive investment destination. They're welcoming outside investment in their countries. We had the Abraham Accords between the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel, which was very significant, several other countries as well. I just was in 5 cities in 5 days in the Middle East. And I think that there's a great possibility for a very positive trajectory there because they have become hubs of innovation. They're investing in far more than just their energy extraction. And even with the price of oil down where it is, again, I think that there are tremendous opportunities and there should be very considerable optimism about there. In fact, we just did a deal there called the Gulf Data Hub, which will facilitate the development of artificial intelligence in the UAE, and they are one of the world's leaders in that and have actually produced the first, if you will, native Arabic large language model in the world. So very, very quite optimistic about what could take place there. I'm hopeful that the administration will be able to reach a deal with Iran that does not require military action. You never know what will happen in that case. But if that is not the case, we need to be very clear, and this will help negotiate, of course, that if they're not willing to do a deal that not only returns us to where we were with the Obama administration deal, but with much longer sunset clauses and more intrusive inspection, if we can't get that, they should know that it is highly likely that we will execute a plan that was developed when I was a CENTCOM commander to destroy that nuclear program.
Excellent. I think we have a few moments remaining, and I'd like to close with 2 points. Number one, if you could please speak about India, another big idea that I believe Trammell and EarthX and our CEO Rajan Singh have gotten right this year is the emphasis on India. So Monday there was an India conference, and then finally, if you can leave our audience with some advice for the aspiring strategic leaders in the room.
Well, India is really poised on what I think is going to be a very, very positive era for them. the largest population in the world, tremendous investment in infrastructure to enable productivity improvements, stability in governance, and a huge number of achievements in recent years, including, most significantly, there used to be something called goods and services tax. It was as if each state had its own tariffs on the other state, and they gradually have removed all of this and made the overall India into a free trade zone, if you will, which it was not, interestingly, prior to that. They're very, very well poised to capitalize on the growing relationship with the United States that, once again, President Bush played a very significant role in during his administration. It includes sharing of nuclear technology, other military technology, et cetera, et cetera. It is a country that has some extraordinary business leaders. In fact, we partner with a number of those, including Mukesh Ambani. And so, all in all, I think it's in a superb position. It's also geographically well positioned, geostrategically, for what is going to become known as the India-Mideast corridor, where you'll have a shipment from India, maritime, into one of the Gulf states, Dubai ideally positioned for this, given the extraordinary infrastructure they have in ports and airports, and then across the Arabian Peninsula, and eventually out into the Mediterranean to Greece or perhaps Italy or perhaps both. And this is going to be quite revolutionary. India does indeed practice India first. I remember sitting with the individual who is now the Minister of External Affairs, their Secretary of State equivalent. This is when he was in private after being the Foreign Secretary, and on stage once there, I said, it's time for India to choose. You must pick between China and the United States. And he said, General, we have chosen, and we have chosen India. But they very admirably balance between China, which is a serious threat to them, and whose soldiers killed several dozen Indian forces on the roof of the world, the line of actual control, which is way up at around 20,000 feet between India and China. They've generally resolved that now. But they're very much positioned toward the Gulf and Europe and the United States. They're one of our major trading partners. And it was reassuring to see our vice president there earlier this week, or last week, and to announce that they're going to become very well positioned when the ultimate tariff numbers are decided for them. So again, a very encouraging location, one that is making the most of the opportunities that they have, very much welcoming foreign direct investment and technology and so forth.
Fantastic.
And then finally, you really asked, I guess, what do you think? Earlier you said, what would be, in your intellectual construct for strategic leadership, what would you say to Trammell and Harlan and all the others in here when it comes to this particular gathering? And I think this is something where Hunter actually captured it. You need to shift the big idea. You have to recognize a new reality. And you don't get to choose the world you'd want. You have to deal with the world as it is. You learn that as a CIA director, to recognize reality and not believe in something that's wonderfully aspirational but is not realistic. And I think, again, that Hunter captured this in his words on accepting that well-deserved award, and that should be the new big idea, if you will, or the refined big idea, as we all go forward, really, and try to achieve the goals of this particular gathering, but doing so in a context that has evolved and is the reality with which we have to deal. But beyond that, let me just say what a privilege it is to be on this stage. Thanks so much for the opportunity, the invitation, Trammell, and thanks for picking this great woman right here, because she has never used enhanced interrogation techniques with me. Thank you all very much.